This is the HX Collective Work Channel, where we explore how relationships with work shapes our growth and flourishing. Join me and my guest, Dr. Deb Gorton, as she recounts her connection with workplace situations and the impact of these situations on her human experience. The HX Collective explores the human experience through three main channels of life: work, relationships, and self. With raw, authentic conversations, the podcast investigates how challenges can become powerful teachers, leading to personal growth and deeper connections. Rooted in humanity-centered design, each episode reflects a commitment to doing good and doing well, featuring diverse voices and generational perspectives. Expect gripping stories of struggle and success, with thought-provoking discussions and concrete tools and tactics that encourage you to rethink your relationship with distress, helping you to establish your full human experience. This is the HX Collective Channel. Hello, my good friend Deb Gorton. It's the day of the Debs. I'm so excited
Me
to
too.
be with you today. And before we get started around our conversation of elevating the human experience, share a little introduction with our audience, please.
Well, I am the other Deb, affectionately known as Todd. And I'm so excited to be here with you. I am a Chicago, not a native, but a Chicago transplant. I've been in the city of Chicago for about 13 years. I'm a clinical psychologist. I have a practice in the city of about 14 staff. We call ourselves a community practice, which is kind of a new term in the world of group practice psychology, but we are invested in community. I am an aunt and a sister, which I absolutely adore. My sister lives here in the city too. And I love to see my nephews every day and hang out with my friends and just be in the city.
I love that. Well, this is going to be such an invaluable conversation because we're going to get the blend of what human flourishing looks like, both in a professional and a clinical context, but we're also going to do it because I know how you live your life. You live your life relationally, and at the center of the interactions of your life are all about human connection. And so when we think about our work at the HX Collective and we think about this subject of human experience, why right now, Deb, do you think it's the most important time to be having this conversation?
Oh my gosh. I was actually reading an article this morning about, I don't know if you've heard that we are in another pandemic right now. It's the loneliness pandemic. And the article was really interesting. It was about using apps, which we typically think as dating, right, to actually have friendship outings. And gosh, I was like, wow, we're having to instruct people in how to build community and to build friendships. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But for me, this idea of human flourishing, you're going to hear me talk a lot about it. It's built in relationship and community. And so when we can step into that space of flourishing, I think it's because we're surrounded by people that are encouraging us, uplifting us, allowing us to be vulnerable. And if we're facing the reality of so many people in our world feeling lonely, human flourishing is absolutely critical. It's a non-negotiable.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate this kind of juxtapositioning. It's like where loneliness lives, flourishing can't, it isn't possible, right?
Yeah.
They're allergic to each other. I'd be curious again on a macro level when we think about the subject of loneliness, and then we'll look at that again in each of the lenses in a moment. But I'm really just curious to get your sense of, how is that affecting, on a macro level when you think about a person who maybe great job, maybe, good friendships, could be a spouse, could be a parent, could be a dog mom. I mean, having things that you would think traditionally would create that feeling of connectedness, and yet loneliness is present. Can you set the condition on how sometimes when we think about having people in our life does not by definition make us feel connected or flourishing? Maybe say a little bit about that.
Oh my gosh. You're making me think of one of my first therapy appointments way back in the day. Not for me as a therapist, for me as a client. And I'll never forget my therapist. I was talking about feeling really lonely. And she was probably in her early 50s. And she goes, Deb, I got to tell you, some of the most loneliest moments in my life are I'm in my kitchen, we're getting the kids ready for school, my husband's making breakfast, I'm packing the lunches, the dog's running around, and I just become overwhelmed, flooded with loneliness. And that's always stuck with me because in that season of my life, I was in my mid-20s and, desperate to find a husband and get married and settle down. And she's like, yeah, that's not going to solve the problem. And now 20 years later, I mean, working with countless clients, couples, adults, you name it, it's true. Nobody is not lonely some of the time. And I think in a world where we feel very connected, it's surface level. And so for me, this idea of what addresses loneliness, it's depth. And whether it's we don't really know how to build deep relationships, we're afraid of being vulnerable and opening up out of fear of judgment or insecurity or inadequacy. Or I see this meme a lot, or maybe it's a video. I never know the difference between the two. Showing my age there on social media. At least I'm on social media, right? And it's supposed to be funny. It's like this: there's two people, and they're chatting, and they're getting ready to go out, and then they get a call from a third friend, and the friend canceled. And you see these two women kind of, oh no, she can't make it. Should we still go? I mean, I'll still go if you want to go. Well, yeah, we could go. It's really cold out. And as they're talking, they're like taking off their makeup and getting undressed and sitting on the couch with a bag of chips and turning on, they're streaming. And it's funny, it's true. But the reality is, I think that's also a piece of we're maybe post-pandemic, we're kind of conditioned to stay in these spaces of comfort and we neglect to invest in community. And that's another piece. It's intentionality. It's going deeper. It requires work.
I have seen the meme and right. Yeah. Like you said, I don't know. It's a video. I don't know what it is, but all that to be said, I've seen what you're talking about. And in addition to having this state or this condition of loneliness, it's almost in that spirit of like no motivation to do anything about it and just sort of bridging. And so it's a great segue as we start to think about, our mission at the HX Collective is to really unite around elevating the human experience and to do that in a way of looking at things through the lens of work, what that means in relationships, and then what that means in self. To be sure, all three of those things connect together. So as we begin your perspective and you're thinking about the prioritization and the criticality when you think about the human experience and the workplace, what that means to elevate the human experience in the context where we're also looking to drive revenue and to, build businesses and commercialize things. Why, from your perspective, do you think human flourishing at work is such a priority strategy and focus right now?
Yeah. Well, I own my own business. So this is very near and dear to my heart. And it helps that I own a mental health practice, right? Because it's always on my mind. And we talk a lot in our team about just the reality of being a professional in the work that we do. We carry a lot of weight because we're meeting with people, we're hearing their deepest pain, sometimes their darkest secrets, their overwhelming challenges, their trauma. And there's a very overused metaphor in probably many lines of work, but definitely in mine, that talks about getting on an airplane, hearing the safety features and being told, right? If there's a drop in cabin pressure, mask will, drop from the ceiling, put yours on before you help somebody else. But the reality is, if we don't care for ourselves, we can help no one. And that doesn't have to be limited just to the mental health field. And so when I think about what's important at my work, and I think any work, it's balance and holistic well-being. And what's funny is, yes, it requires an investment, but the return on that investment is exponential. I mean, there's so many studies about staying in workplace environments that really prioritize work-life balance. And so, we all know the cost, or it's pretty easy to find the cost with a little Google search of what it takes to bring on a new employee. And when you have high rates of turnover, it's a huge cost to a company. But when my team is functioning at their best, when they're caring for their mental health, their relational health, their physical health, their spiritual health, their emotional health, man, they are killing it in the workplace. They bring an authentic self into the therapeutic office. They build healthy relationships with their clients. They're consistent. They're noticing pathways and problem solving so much more effectively, which they're happy at work, which I love. I mean, one of our core values is community, and we do that internally and externally. And a bonus and perk of that is they're seeing more clients and generating more revenue. So they're making the workplace more financially viable, but they're also enjoying the work that they do, which means they're going to stay with me longer.
Yeah. One of the factors I admire so much about how you're building your practice is how much of a priority you place on in-person delivery of services. And I know that a lot of people that are listening, there's that grappling of, isn't work-life balance the ability to have remote work or have hybrid work? When you think about access to services, to create conditions where a client physically is coming in um, for a counseling session with you all. And yet, when you think about the in person part of it, I can't help but think there's something like, I may not want to do it, but I'm going to do it anyway. Talk a little bit about that, just as both a personal observation as a business owner, but also how that might encourage leaders that are listening to this podcast. What's the value of the in person, and how do you navigate that?
Yeah. Oh, I'm going to speak on it briefly from a workplace environment and then come to the reality of doing clinical work in person. So there was a big study that was just released evaluating work from home, the kind of flex scheduling of in-office versus virtual work. And even I found this so fascinating, but not surprising. Even employees who are arguably the ones wanting the flex schedules and the work from home opportunities, and maybe even more specifically in certain generations like our millennials and our Gen Zers, even they would acknowledge that they are not well equipped for the work that they're supposed to be doing. Like their onboarding experiences are really kind of abysmal. They don't feel connected to their teams or their workplace mission and vision, and their output then is diminished. Right? It's not excellent. Because there is something to be said about reading the nuances of a person face to face. I mean, I'm a behavioral scientist, so of course I'm looking at things from this angle, but when a client is across from me virtually, yes, we can build a connection. Yes, it's great because it has made mental health available to people who maybe never had it before, living in remote or rural areas or traveling all the time for work. But when you're in person, you see these little subtle things like a shift in movement or a micro change in a facial expression. And there's nothing separating you from that person. So when they're saying things that are incredibly painful, vulnerable, overwhelming, I think there's just a different level of empathy that occurs in a face-to-face setting. And I think it's actually a little bit more uncomfortable to be in a face-to-face space, to really recognize I'm sitting across from a person, I'm being incredibly vulnerable. And you know me, I wrote a whole book about the importance of embracing uncomfortable. It creates cognitive dissonance, which is the biggest predictor of change. And so I'm all for it. We tell all of our clients, we prioritize in person. We were designed for relationship. That's the core of the work that we're doing. We want to be flexible with you. So we'll work with what we can. But if you can come in, we can almost guarantee change will happen more quickly, more consistently, and more enduring.
Yeah.
Enduringly.
Yeah.
If that's a word.
No, I mean, we make up words all the time. So
Awesome.
all right. Well, I like this idea of cognitive dissonance, and it's in some regards what I'm thinking about is, and we're just using the occasion of, I have to come trudge into the office to be there in person. But in a lot of ways, it's sort of the same principle of, that you're not going to see breakthrough or growth absent some dissonance that kind of requires you to challenge yourself. I'm almost thinking like working out. Like I'd love to be able to read books and have muscle and fit, but there's a certain like distress that we apply. And when you think about human flourishing at work, this almost seems like a really practical way that people can elevate human flourishing, which is to have, a consciousness and a quality around in person. So that dissonance of like, yeah, it made an effort to be here. It took something of me. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I always talk about the fact that we're designed physically to be in a very homeostatic state. I think about when COVID hit, I was teaching grad school and we shut down for just a very little period of time and then we opened back up. And every time I walked into a building, they had these thermometer stations, right? And you had to take your temperature. And I don't know why, but I set the thermometer off every time. And I'd always have to have a backup. And my temperature was always pretty normal, right? Which is 98.6. That's a pretty specific number. It's not 99. It's not 97. Yes, it might fluctuate a decimal point or two, but our resting healthy temperature is 98.6. And the minute it spikes or the minute it drops, different mechanisms in our body go into place to bring us back to a state of rest. What does that have to do with cognitive dissonance? The same is true for our overall functioning. When we experience cognitive dissonance, our brain and our body start going, what do I need to change to bring me back to a state of balance? And so again, the key word there is change. When we create cognitive dissonance, it motivates somebody or ourselves to actually make a change within what's in our control to bring us back to a state of balance. And so there's a reason why there's that saying, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is the definition of insanity. Yeah, we've got to actually create discomfort in order to produce change in our lives. Cognitive dissonance is a very effective tool for getting people to do the things they really need to be doing.
I just love it. I love it. So it's the sort of like it's good for us, even though if it doesn't feel pleasant.
Yeah, it does not feel pleasant.
It does not feel pleasant. As you think, and again, I know with highest regard of confidentiality and sort of protecting your client interactions, I'm curious though if you could consider, if there are leaders listening right now and they're thinking about how do I bring a human flourishing focus into my workplace and not have it feel like just window dressing or making it woo woo. When you think about the clients and their relationship with themselves at work, or you think about what you're hearing clinically, that if leaders knew what they could be doing to really create an environment where people want to be at work, where there is that space where the workplace is a place where human beings were elevated and flourishing, what are some practical tips or observations, based on the challenges and struggles that you're encountering when people have work related struggle?
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest things that people can do, and for some reason, I mean, I get it, we're kind of conflict avoidant as a human race, but for some reason, this is very difficult for people, is to be honest and clear, right? So I think there's a lot of bosses, CEOs, executives out there that avoid difficult conversations and difficult situations. And so they try to kind of mask the reality of the circumstances. But the truth of the matter is we're smart. We may not be smart all the time, but we're pretty smart and we can figure when something's wrong. We crave, just give me the real honest to goodness truth. Tell me where I'm struggling. Tell me where the business is struggling. Tell me when this season is going to be challenging and what we can do to kind of power through it versus trying to sugarcoat things, sweep things under the rug. I think that's really, really huge. And I also believe it communicates a level of respect to people. Like I've had to sit down and tell my staff, hey, our numbers aren't great this year. And I feel insecure and inadequate as a boss when that's happening, right? And so, but I also find when we do that, I've gotten the feedback of, wow, thank you so much for trusting me with the reality of where the organization is at. And it gives me motivation to think through how I can contribute to increasing the bottom line and being more creative and bringing in clients. Or just even knowing that this is where we're at and we got to be thinking, more proactively and how we're going to get to the next space. So I think that's a really big piece in the buy-in and the community part of an organization when you're willing to do that as a boss. And then I think the second piece is really thinking about and investing in your people to say, hey, how can I come alongside and empower you in this space of what's best for you in this season? I can't guarantee things, but we sit down with our staff every quarter and we say, what are your goals for the year? And they aren't just limited to work, right? What do you, at the end of the year, if you look back on 2025, what would make you say this year was successful? And my team knows, like they could say, oh, if I really got to pick my kids up every day from school, which means I'd have to leave work early. Is there any way that we can make that happen? And I put, the ownership on them. Give me some ideas. Come back with a plan. That investment piece, but then the clarity of knowing what's going on, what they're navigating. I think both of those things just tell my staff, hey, I believe in you. I trust you and I respect you. And I know that you contribute to this organization as a whole person.
It sounds so common sense, but not common practice, right? It seems so obvious. Like, by the way, just the energy expended when you tell people the kind truth or the hard truth, it's so liberating because it's not hard, because it's rooted in truth. And I think we sometimes forget that as leaders at work. We're compromising our human experience when we feel this weight of sugarcoating or not being courageous in how we're communicating. I also, as kind of a final point, you're such a voracious reader, and I read an article last year and sort of carried some insights around it. It was a Forbes article that was describing that the most influential person on on your mental health and well-being, there's a tie between spouse or partner and your supervisor, and that supervisor had even more impact on the mental health and well-being than your therapist, your friends, your
Wow.
extended family. And so when you're thinking about the role that the leader plays in the workplace on human flourishing, are there any other practical tips? Like, so if I'm a supervisor and you're saying, all right, Deb, this is what you can do to positively impact the mental health of your employees, any practical tips or guidelines
Yeah.
on that?
I would be remiss not to highlight the fact that human flourishing includes the word human.
Mm.
Like giving yourself permission to be human. I think a lot of times as supervisors, as bosses, we feel this need to hide any part of ourselves that would suggest we're human and flawed. So that's just
What's the
one thing,
flawed part? It's the
right?
human flaw,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
we think that we have to have that perfection. So
Oh my
yes.
gosh. And in that, own when you've made a mistake, or create environments where your team is able to give you feedback. So whenever we're in a setting with our team, I'm always saying, "Hey, how are things going? Is there anything I can do to serve you better? Is there anything I've done that has made your work challenging or ineffective, or you haven't felt appreciated?" And of course, in the beginning, nobody wanted to say anything, right? Like, don't upset the boss, don't say anything negative. And so when somebody finally was brave and stepped out and said, "Oh, Deb, you know what? You kind of struggle with follow through. Like, you give us these great new ideas and we start to implement them, and then we never hear about them ever again. And it feels like you don't value our time because we're putting all this investment into this idea or this plan, and then we never hear about it ever again." And I praise the heck out of that person. Thank you so much. You know what? You're right. That is a huge growth area for me. And when they saw that they weren't getting reprimanded and when it actually impacted change, now feedback is a common rhythm in our practice. So I think that's one thing. As a supervisor, create an environment where feedback, especially for you, is modeled and regularly encouraged. Be present. I make it a point to check in with my team physically in person at least 15 minutes every week, in addition to our one-on-one meetings and, our quarterly meetings and things like that. And I want to know outside of work how life is. And I make a point to remember those things. One of my team members, his son had a minor surgery. And the day of the surgery, texted, "Hey, thinking of you, praying for your son." Made sure that a couple days later, I checked in and said, "Hey, how's it going? How's he doing?" It's those little things that I think go incredibly far. And the reality is, every one of us in the workplace has a coworker, an employee, a supervisee that's gone through something that's affected their work, something outside of the work, a breakup, a loss, right? When you create a condition of your staff feeling comfortable sharing with you situations that could affect their workplace effectiveness, their presence, right? They're more likely to come to you on the front end. And so you can address those challenges ahead of time. So I think it's just creating that intentionality, being vulnerable, creating spaces for feedback, and then checking in regularly and making sure that you're checking in holistically. It's not just about the work that they do, it's about them as a person.
I love that. And the practicalities that you're highlighting, it just, again, if you are purposed in that 15 minutes and just the consciousness of it, so you don't just squeeze it in if it happens, like it's a strategy. And I love the idea of human flourishing as modeled by your own communication, your own feedback, your own vulnerability. Thanks for being here. If today's conversation sparked something in you, we hope you'll carry it forward with curiosity, compassion, and courage. Subscribe to the show, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who needs it. Until next time, keep exploring what it means to be fully human.